Hello there, FFTCG community. I'm Judge Jared, and this is episode 20 of Rules Roundup. That's right, episode 20, the big 2-0. Somehow, I have already hit 20 episodes of answering rules questions, and here we are. Couldn't have done it without you, so thank you for watching. You're a part of this too. Obviously, you're watching this right now, so you are a part of it. But so this is Rules Roundup, of course, the series where I go over rules questions that were asked in the unofficial global FFTCG server this week and give you the answers to those questions, as well as diving into the rules and the reasons behind those answers so that you can both test your own knowledge on these rules and also test yourself on how well you would be able to explain these answers or answer these questions for other people if the questions came up for you. And then hopefully by the end of all of this, you walk away with something, at least a little something that you didn't know beforehand. So I've been kind of saying this, I think, every week for the last few weeks, but we're still in exciting times right now. And mostly it's been exciting recently because of it being the kind of the early days of the new set and also the changes in the ban list and the restricted list. So people feel kind of much more open in a post-Una world. I know some people are feeling a little less open in we're back to Refia and Chaos Arc world, but that's a whole nother discussion. People are testing out new stuff. We're seeing new things pop up. At the Portland Materia Cup, people notice things like the Category 12 Turbo Bosch deck, getting a little resurgence, some new toys and things in there. And I know people are just trying to just experiment a little bit with things. But in addition to that, we're also barreling towards the end of the competitive season here in North America. This last weekend was the final weekend of local qualifiers. So we are all done with local qualifiers for the season. And then coming up this upcoming weekend is the Raleigh Materia Cup, which is the last Materia Cup of the season. So people are just heading right into that to finish our season strong, and see what else pops up. Since Portland was, of course, that right on that cusp of just barely a new legal set for it, the Wild Wild West in every sense, and then Raleigh gets to be the Wild Wild East, I guess. And we'll see if people have just kind of settled back into the stuff we're used to seeing, or if maybe some spicy stuff shows up. I don't know. But once we get through Raleigh, then we are just about all but done heading into Nationals next month, which there will be there will be the last chance qualifier, which is normally slated to have 4 available slots or invites for Nationals. And I know that one invite has been confirmed to have gone from having been earned already to the last chance qualifier. So actually there's 5 confirmed at this point in time. So by the end of this weekend in Raleigh, we will have just about all but 5-ish of the 128 invites for Nationals decided. So we're close. We're almost there. We're almost into Nationals territory. For all those reasons, very exciting right now. And even if you're not doing super competitive stuff, if you're just playing at locals, playing with friends, playing at the kitchen table, it's still just a very exciting, fun time to be experimenting with these new cards. I have stuff that I want to mess with some more when I find the time for it, and I hope you do too. But anyway, all that being out of the way, this is Rules Roundup. We got to round up some rules. They're out there unrounded and just running loose. So let's round these guys up. All right, first question today is about Anima. Odds are we probably figured this out, but do self-referential effects like this Animas only apply to the cards removed by this individual instance of Anima, or to every card named Anima? We have figured this out, but we're going to figure it out again together right now. So let's go over what Anima actually says, and then we'll talk about instances of cards and all that. So, Anima has 2 auto abilities. The first one says, when Anima enters the field, choose 2 cards in your break zone, remove them from the game. All right, so Anima enters, you pick 2 cards in your break zone, and whoosh, sent off by Anima. Second auto ability. At the end of each of your turns, remove the top card of your deck from the game. Then, if there are 5 or more cards removed by Anima's ability, add them to your hand and break all the forwards opponent controls. Well, that sounds pretty strong. So at the end of each of your turns, you're removing the top card of your deck, and then you're just throwing it on the pile that was started with the 2 from when Anima entered the field. And now we're starting to build up, and then once we reach 5 cards in that pile, now we trigger the part that says if there's 5 or more, add them to your hand and break all the forwards opponent controls. Okay, so the key part in this is the part that says cards removed by Anima's ability. This is one of those unfortunate cases where we just have like a translation/localization that is not particularly clear, especially because it says 5 or more cards removed by Anima's ability. It says ability singular. So that's already a little bit grammatically awkward because we're actually referring to multiple abilities. We have the first auto ability. We're going to count those ones. And then we're going to count the ones that are removed by this second auto ability that occurs at the end of each of your turns. And so when we reach 5 there, they've been removed from either of Anima's abilities. Then we trigger the taking them in our hand, breaking all the forwards opponent controls. So the question at hand here is that they refer to it as a self-referential effect because it says removed by Anima's ability. It's referring to itself. It's saying, does this apply only to the cards removed by this individual instance of Anima or to every card named Anima? So that can mean a couple different things. First is, let's say that your opponent was also playing Anima, right? If they had an Anima and you had an Anima, then is this one referring to all cards removed by Anima? Which would be really awkward because it says to add them to your hand. And that means you'd be adding the ones that your opponent also removed. And so if that's not obvious already, yeah, we're not talking about that situation. We're definitely not going to count the ones that your opponent played if they also are using Anima or any version of Anima that removes stuff from the game. The other case is, let's say that we played Anima, we removed 2 cards from the game, and it did not make it to the end phase, or the end phase before something nuked it and it was gone. Whoosh, right? So we had those 2 cards that were removed by Anima, and then they got orphaned and they're removed from play zone. And then we play a second instance of Anima later. Maybe it's the same exact card and we got it back with Kusith or something, and then we played it again, or maybe we just drew the copy and we played that now. So now that enters, we remove 2 more cards. Okay, cool. We've added those into the remove from play zone. And then we get to the end of the turn and we remove another one. And now you might be thinking, okay, wait, the first Anima, it removed 2. And then this Anima, it removed 2. And then the end of the turn, we're removing another one. We've hit 5, right? Right? Have we hit 5? We have not hit 5. So the important thing here is when a card says its own name in its text, when it just says the name of the card, that's their way of writing this card, right? So they're not going to actually write out this card in the text, but that's what it means. They're referring to this card, and not just this card, like not physically the card, but this instance of this card, which is why the question referred to the idea of this individual instance of Anima. As a reminder for anybody who could use one, we talk about an instance of a card. We talk about the fact that when a card enters the field, it becomes an instance of of whatever it is, and it is a unique instance for the length of time that it is on the field. Once it leaves the field, it is no longer that instance of the card, and if it comes back, even if it's physically the same card, it is now a different instance of that card. For example, we play Anima the first time, it comes out, and we just slap a number on it. We say, you are Anima number 266. Okay, Anima 266, it removed 2 cards from the game. That's what we're talking about when we refer to the cards removed by Anima's ability. And then it gets nuked before it can do anything else, so it goes away. We have those 2 cards removed from the game that were removed by Anima 266. And then we play another Anima later in the game, and we play that out, and it goes, okay, cool. This is Anima number 282. All right, so Anima 282 comes in, it removes 2 cards from the game. And at the end of the turn, it removes another card from the game. And now when we're checking, we're not looking at cards removed by Anima. We're looking for cards removed by Anima 282 because that's the one that the auto ability is triggering from. So the Anima 282 doesn't care what Anima 266 did. Does not care at all. So for that reason, we are not counting those. And then if this poor Anima met the same fate as the other one and it left, all right, well, next one comes in and now we have a third Anima that doesn't care about what 282 did and doesn't care about what 266 did. So if they wanted them to count all of them, they would say, instead of just saying the name, they would say card name Anima, right? Card name Anima would refer to all copies of a card with that same exact card name. So, long explanation, I know, but to come back to the original question, does it only apply to cards removed by this individual instance of Anima or to every card named Anima? It only refers to the ones removed by this instance of Anima, not every card named Anima. So that's part of what makes this Anima a little bit tough to work out, is that it's got to survive for 3 turns, right? Because it comes in, it removes 2. At the end of the turn, it removes a 3rd one, and then the next turn, a 4th one, and the 3rd turn, 5th one. So it's got to survive that long, as well as keeping its abilities the whole time. If it had its abilities removed, then it's not going to remove anything either. So, yeah, it's part of the reason it doesn't see a whole lot of play, but you can get surprised by it sometimes if it does its thing. Breaking all the opponent's forwards, not a bad effect, in addition to getting 5 cards added to your hand. All right, next up. Does Opus 16 Wool draw from casting himself? Excellent question. What we're looking at here is Wool's last auto ability that starts about this last 2 lines, basically, of his text. It says, when you cast a character of cost 5 or more, draw 1 card. This effect will trigger only once per turn. Turns out, Wool costs 5. So this question has come up a lot since Wool was released. He's cost 5, and it says when you cast a character of cost 5 or more, draw 1 card. So is he drawing a card for himself? And the answer is no. The answer is that he is not drawing one for himself. And the reason why is because with a character, we have to separate out the casting process from it being on the field. The thing about auto abilities on characters is that they can only trigger once the character is on the field, and they only trigger when their trigger event happens. Hopefully you're with me so far. So what that means is this Wool, the trigger event, is when you cast a character of cost 5 or more. So it needs to be on the field when you cast a character of cost 5 or more. This is not going to catch you casting Wool because there is that separation. And to help illustrate, I'm going to use might not be the most obvious thing here, but we're going to talk about when you cast summons. Because when you cast summons, it's a little bit more obvious the separation between casting the summon and the summon resolving, right? The summon doing its thing. Because it has to go on the stack, right? So any trigger event that comes from casting a summon happens when you've finished paying for it and it goes on the stack. It hasn't resolved yet, but you've finished the payment process and you have cast it, and then there's that delay before it resolves. But we don't have to worry about it resolving for things that say when you cast a summon to trigger, because it's all about the paying it and then carrying out the casting of it, not what happens afterward. With characters, it's a little bit less obvious that those 2 different steps, because they don't use the stack. They just enter the field right away. But there still is that separation, because when you're casting it, you declare that you're casting it, figure out what the cost for it is, pay the cost, and then after you've paid the cost, you've finished casting and the character enters the field. Okay, so there's this whole casting process, and then after the casting process is done, the character enters the field. But at that point where you finish the casting process, right before the character entered the field, that is the trigger event. That is the casting of a character. So what that means is when that moment happens where the trigger event is, Wool is not on the field yet. And since he's not on the field, it means that his auto ability can't trigger. This is also something we've seen illustrated a lot with Atomos, right? The 2CP wind monster, because it has that auto ability that when you cast your second card that turn, you choose up to 2 backups. I think it's up to 2. I know it's 2, but I forget if it's up to. And you activate them. And people are almost always asking, oh, what if a Tomos is your second cast? Does it trigger it? And the answer with the Tomos is no, it doesn't trigger it, because you've missed that window of that it wasn't on the field when the second cast happened. It was like right before it entered the field. Same thing here with Wool. So it's, if you're trying to make this Wool work, I know it's a bummer, because the idea of going, well, he costs 5, but he's really actually 3. That's, not bad, especially if you reduce his cost with other things. But it doesn't work. Just because, again, the trigger event happens before he's actually entered the field. And so hopefully I was able to illustrate there kind of the separation between casting a character and then it entering the field. Next up, we have, how do the cards with 4 each and 4 every work? Do they include the character brought on the field or not? Appreciate the help. This is one of those questions that annoyingly the answer is, it depends. I will point out that they do use 4 each all the time. We actually never use the phrase 4 every, so you can just toss that out. Don't worry about getting that into your lexicon of FFTCG terms. But they do love the phrase 4 each. And I give them 2 examples here. The first one is Trey. And Trey's auto ability here says, when Trey enters the field, choose 1 forward opponent controls, deal it 2,000 damage for each job class 0 cadet you control. And of course, it's going to check how many you control when it resolves. So what we're looking at is how many you have when it resolves. So I'm just going to assume that there wasn't any shenanigans where something got removed, including Trey. So if Trey is still on the field when this auto ability resolves, it does include him, because it doesn't explicitly tell us not to include him. It doesn't say other than Trey. So for that reason, if he was the only class 0 cadet, then when it resolved, yes, you would deal 2,000 damage to the forward that you chose. And to be honest, most effects that are worded like this, if the character itself can be included in that, most of them do include that character. Most of them don't go out of their way to exclude it. And in trying to find examples of times where they do exclude themselves, I actually found a pattern that I had never noticed before, which is kind of cool. So there are a bunch of cards that do say other than, and then whatever the card's name is, right? And the pattern is all of those cards that exclude themselves are always for field abilities that increase its power. So it's just an interesting distinction. So when a character forward particularly has a field ability that increases its power for each whatever, and it is whatever that thing is, it always excludes itself. Example of this is there's the Fran that gets plus 1,000 power for each job Sky Pirate that you control, and it says other than Fran. So in that case, yeah, it's everything except for herself. There's also the original, speaking of cadets, the original King has a field ability that says King's power, or King gains plus 1,000 power for each job 0 cadet forward you control other than King. So again, doesn't include himself. And if you look through pretty much every instance where there's a field ability that gives it additional power based off of some descriptor that it would be including itself, they go out of their way to say other than itself. And you might think, well, couldn't they just include it but then just lower the printed power by 1 so you still end up with the same total? Oh, by the way, Leo's another one of these, the Earth Leo that everybody knows about, right? He just gets plus 1,000 power for every character, but it does say other than himself, other than Leo. But back to my point, couldn't they just lower by 1,000 and then include themselves so that it's simpler? They could, but you end up changing a couple little things on the margin. One is that you change the printed power, which means now any effect that refers to printed power or that kind of sets it back to its printed power now is lower, right? So they end up kind of nerfing the card indirectly, because if something refers to its power that's printed, now it's smaller. The other reason is if it lost its abilities, then again you would end up with it being smaller. So it would, in some instances, it would nerf the card by just making it 1,000 less power whenever stuff happens to its ability, or when things are referring to its printed power. So it's not exactly the same to if they did just include it but made it 1,000 less power. So there's a trade-off there. But Yeah, so that's a case where they don't include themselves. The other one that I included here is Ralger, who's been hanging out very patiently on the other side of the screen. Ralger has a field ability. It says the cost required to cast Ralger is reduced by 1 for each job the 12 you control. And I just put this in there as an example because it doesn't specifically say other than Ralger. But going back a little bit to the question right before this with Wool, this field ability comes in play when you're determining the cost of Ralger. And when you're determining the cost, Ralger is not yet on the field, which means that it doesn't include himself just by nature of the fact that he's not on the field to count. So, I just wanted to kind of flag that as a case where it doesn't say for each other than Ralger, but because of the nature of the effect here and that it's affecting the cost that's required to what you have to spend to cast Ralger, it doesn't actually matter because he's not on the field yet. So they didn't have to make that distinction. All right, next up. Vrtra. Since an already dull forward can become dull, which is true, can Vrtra's second field ability choose an already dull forward and still deal 7,000 damage, or is the damage tied to the act of the forward needing to go from an active state to a dull state? Quick little correction. The question refers to Vrtra's second field ability, but what we're actually referring to is Vrtra's, the second ability down there is an auto ability, just so that we start off on the right foot here. It's not a field ability, it's an auto ability. The auto ability reads, when a lightning forward you control attacks, choose one forward opponent controls, dull it, and deal it 7,000 damage. So the use case here is you just have Vrtra on the field, you attack with either Vrtra itself or another lightning forward, and that triggers Vrtra's ability, goes on the stack, you choose a forward opponent controls, and when it resolves, you dull that forward and then deal it 7,000 damage. And so, like I confirmed before, yes, you can dull something that's already dull, like nothing changes, but like it doesn't, it just goes, okay, we're going to dull it. Well, you're dull. You were dull before and you're dull now. But for this, so the question is it required for you to go from active to dull for the 7,000 damage? And the good news here, if you're a Vrtra player, is it doesn't require that. The way that they've worded this, it's not, those two things are not like reliant or connected to each other at all. It's just two different actions, right? You're choosing the forward the opponent controls, and then when you resolve it, the first action is to dull it, and the second action is to deal it 7,000 damage. If they wanted it to require going from active to dull, they would have made it so that you had to choose an active forward opponent controls. I mean, I guess they could have tried to sneak in and make it, you don't have to do it when you choose, but then make it part of the, if it went from active, or dull it, and then if it went from active to dull, like there's a really awkwardly worded way you could make it work where it doesn't have to be active when you choose it. But for simplicity, let's say you had to choose an active forward, and then it would check on resolution whether the forward was still active, and then it would dull it, and then it would deal 7,000. And so it wouldn't explicitly require it in that situation, but it would, you'd end up with it's going from active to dull and dealing 7,000 damage, except for the weird case where you have like a forward that can't become dull, in which case the way this, if it was worded this way, except for it said choose an active forward, you wouldn't actually make that forward dull, but you would still deal 7,000 damage. So I don't know. I'm going down some rabbit holes right now. But that's just to kind of explain how they would require it if they wanted to, and like what that would look like so that we can kind of recognize that when it does show up on other effects. But in this case, nope, they're just two independent things. It says dull it, deal 7,000 damage, and if you can't do one of those two things, that's fine. You do it as much as possible. They're not at all contingent or reliant on each other to happen there. So yeah, don't worry about that. Either way, you're dealing 7,000 damage, and if that didn't break it for whatever reason, it's also dull now. So good for you. Next question is, does Helena's cost reduction also affect alternate costs? For example, the 2 CP in Joom's alternate cost with the crystal. So which card do I want to explain first here? Let's talk about the alternate cost on Joom. So she has this first line of text that says, you can pay 2 CP and a crystal instead of paying the CP cost to cast Jum. Right, so just in general, anytime you're casting her, instead of paying the normal amount and doing the 4 where you have to have at least 1 wind, you can pay 2 and a crystal, and then you're square. Helena Leonis has this ability that costs a crystal, and it reads, reveal the top 2 cards of your deck, remove 1 card among them from the game, and put the other to the bottom of your deck. You can cast it anytime you could normally cast it this turn. The cost required to cast it is reduced by 2. You can only use this ability during your turn and only once per turn. So the important bits for this question is the fact that you remove a card and then it says you can cast it at any time you can only cast it this turn. Actually, that part's not as important. Sorry. The important part is that you remove it and then it says the cost required to cast it is reduced by 2. And very importantly, this is one of the rare effects that doesn't say it cannot become 0. It can become 0. So this has been asked on Twitter before, and it's been ruled. So I know 110% this is the correct answer. But yes, it can affect the alternate cost, and because it doesn't have the cannot become 0, that means it absolutely can reduce the CP cost portion of this alternate cost to 0, which means, yeah, you would only have to pay the crystal at that point. So if you have Helena Leonis out, you use the ability, you flip over Jum, you go, okay, that's going to be the one that I removed from the game, and now I'm going to cast it at a reduced cost of 2. So now I'm just going to do the alternate cost, and I'm paying a crystal, and poof, there's my forward. Yes, you can absolutely do that. I guess the important thing, this came up with limit break cards at one point when they first got announced. When you have something that gets its cost reduced by 2, we're only ever referring to the CP cost. So like if you had something that cost 2 crystals as an alternate, I guess like the new Barts, which is three crystals, reducing the cost required to cast is you can't reduce the crystal cost. It's always talking about the CP cost. And similarly with LB cards, you definitely cannot reduce the LB cost portion of it. So yeah, just keep that in mind. But yeah, any effects that reduce the cost, CP cost of things, will reduce the cost of any of these, like Where's the Crystal, that have that alternate casting cost that you can do. So if you had used Tilica that turn, you could cast Jum by dulling or by generating 1 CP and then paying a crystal. So that works as well. Yeah, so it's just a fun little interaction that these alternate costs, if they involve CP and you have something that reduces the cost, then you can reduce that alternate CP cost. Might be a little too soon for this one, but the Earth Cecil with its alternate cost of 1 Earth and 1 water. I know that, RIP Rosa, but if you flipped that one off of this Helena, you could cast it with the alternate cost for 0 and then just take a point of damage. And more reasons for people to not like that card. But it's been nerfed. I don't think we're too worried about it right now. But interesting little case there. Next up, my opponent controls the cost 5 man in black, and I control the cost 4 man in black. He cast Chaos, cost 11. When I select my man in black, what happens? He can't take control due to a copy of it, or he takes control and both break. So we have here 2 different versions of the same card name. Different serial numbers and different whatever, but they're identical card name. And I didn't put Chaos on here, but most people know Chaos at this point. That when it enters the field, your opponent selects a forward they control other than light and dark, and then you gain control of it. So they're saying, all right, well, my opponent had a man in black, and I have a man in black, and they play Chaos, and I'm going to select my man in black for them to take control of. What now? That's essentially the question here. And the interesting thing here is people always think about the rules about how you can't cast something if you already have that card name in play and it's not a multi-card or generic card. It doesn't have a little symbol with the 3 cards on it. And so if you have enough, you can't cast it and you can't like if you try to resolve an effect that would play one to the field and you already control it, then the effect just fails to play the card to the field and it just keeps it in whatever zone it was in. So people are very familiar with that rule. It's very kind of structurally baked in. But taking control of a card is another beast here. And the reason why is because, as a reminder, there's only one field. That in and of itself gets confusing because there's so many effects that refer to your field. And so the fact they say your field kind of implies that there's two fields, but there isn't. There's only one field. You have your side of the field. There's the opponent's side of the field, but it's all one zone. Because it's all one zone, we don't run afoul of the rules of a character entering the field that when you already control one, because taking control of a forward is not it entering the field, which is the same reason why when you do that, it doesn't trigger it's when this enters the field ability. So taking control of something is not it entering the field, which means that it is legal to take control of something that you already control that card name. So that like carrying out that process, totally legal. So the question is, once you've carried out that process, what happens? Because now that you've resolved it, now you've got two men in black on the same side of the field. So what do we do now? And they say, is it that you can't take control of it, or do they both break? Well, they can take control of it. It's still a valid target, as I just explained. Totally legal to take control of it. But then what happens is, after you resolve the effect, we get into rule processes, which I've described before, but rule processes get checked every single time that a player is about to gain priority, right before they gain priority. Can't do anything about this, but right beforehand, we do a quick go down our list of 7 things. I believe it's 7 things to make sure that we don't have to fix any rule processes. And one of those things on that list of 7 is, do you control 2 or more of a card with the same exact card name that doesn't have the multiplay symbol? And if you do, what happens here is not what's written in the question, which is, do they both break? They do not both break. However, they are both put into the break zone. That's an important distinction because being put into the break zone gets around effects that say it can't be broken. For example, if you had that 7 CP Arden with the ability that says it can't be broken and you stole your opponent's Arden, if this was an effect, or if rule processes broke the 2 Ardens, then the 7 CP Arden would be like, I don't break, bro. And it would stick around. But because it says that you put them into the break zone, that gets around effects that say it can't be broken. So even in that case, both Ardens would whoosh off to the break zone. So yeah, they're both put into the break zone if you happen to control 2 of the same card name that doesn't have the multiplay symbol. So that's how it resolves. You take control of the men in black, or the man in black. You now have 2 men in black. They look at each other for a second, and then they both poof off to the break zone. So it is a fun way if your opponent doesn't realize that's how it works and they play the chaos. It's a fun way to kind of mess up their plan overall. Like if they had a Leo out and then you have a Leo and you go, okay, cool, you can have my Leo, and then both Leos just explode and they don't have an opportunity, because this is during rule processes and nobody can add anything to the stack. They don't have an opportunity to like do anything with one of those Leos before they both go away. All right, next up. If I Amaterasu the second auto, do I need to discard for every character my opponent put into the break zone by Bhunivelze? Well, let's read Bhunivelze and find out. I can say it, Bhunivelze. So, his auto ability reads, when Bhunivelze enters the field, you may put any number of forwards and or monsters you control into the break zone. When you do so, your opponent selects one forward they control for each character you put into the break zone by this effect. Select as many as possible. Put them into the break zone. Your opponent discards 1 card for each character you put into the break zone by this effect. That's all one auto ability. We have 6 lines? 6-line auto ability here. There's a whole lot going on with this god. And they're saying, if I Amaterasu the second auto, do I still have to discard? What they mean by that is that this is one of those dreaded when you do so auto abilities. which means that there's the first half, which is putting any number of forwards or monsters you control in the break zone. And then after that point, you have the when you do so, which is generating a new auto ability that goes on the stack. And then that can be responded to. And so let's say that they put 5 forwards and or monsters in the break zone. Cool. We trigger the when you do so. That goes on the stack. It's on the stack, and the opponent goes, you know what? I'm going to Amaterasu that. And they Amaterasu it. And they're wondering if they still have to discard. Because there's 2 parts of the resolution of this when you do so, right? The first is it says for each character that was put in the break zone, the opponent has to select 1 forward they control and put it into the break zone. And they have to discard 1 for each character they put in the break zone. So they're like, am I only Amaterasuing the first part, which is the putting the characters in the break zone, and I still have to discard for it? How does that work? And this is understandable that it's a very reasonable question to ask, because there's multiple things going on and they're not related to each other. And so it seems like, what's my Amaterasu actually accomplishing here? Because there's so much going on with this second generated auto ability. And it's very similar to the Vrtra question earlier, right? Where the Vrtra had an auto ability that dulled the forward and dealt it 7,000 damage. And those were 2 different actions on the same target in that case, but they were 2 separate actions, right? And in many ways, it's like whenever we have one of those modal effects, whether it's a summon or an auto ability, and the modal thing says select X out of X, and then you just you do your own a la carte effect, and then you do all of that, but it's all one effect on the stack, but it has multiple actions within it. We have that all the time on existing effects that are not modal, and it's the same concept. There's multiple actions built into the same effect, but it's all one effect. It's all one ability, or it's all one summon. That's what's happening here. The when you do so, it's got 2 actions in it. The first action is the opponent has to put forwards into the break zone equal to the number of characters that were put in the break zone by the first auto, or by the auto that generated this one. And then the second action is they have to discard 1 for each character put in the break zone. So when you Amaterasu it, it's all one effect with 2 actions, and Amaterasu cancels the effect, so the whole thing goes poof. Which gets into the part of the reason why Bhunivelze, I've never personally seen it hit the field before, because it is so risky. Because you have to decide how many of these forwards or monsters you're putting in the break zone before you even know if it's going to resolve. If you're playing against a deck that doesn't have fire or water, then I don't know where you're playing, because that's just the meta right now. But if you are playing against one that doesn't have fire or water, then sure, you can feel a little bit safer, probably. I mean, watch out for mono wind if they've got 4 or more backups. But if you feel like, okay, it's not going to be canceled, then sure, knock yourself out. You can put a bunch of things in and go, cool, I'm going to blow up your stuff, and you have to discard. But it is very vulnerable to being canceled, because now you've just put 5 things in the break zone and they just went Amaterasu, and you paid 7 and put 5 things in the break zone, and you get nothing except for a 10k forward, because he's now blank after that resolves. So, all right, I forgot. 1 CP Ifrit with 5 characters. It generates 2 autos, right? So I can ask to resolve 1 first and then hold priority to the second. For example, if I target a Siren board. Okay, first things first here. We have to correct the fact that Ifrit does not generate any auto abilities. Just before anybody gets carried away here with that. It's to how the question was worded, and I want to be true to the way it was originally asked. But I just want to make sure that our original takeaway is that Ifrit does not generate any auto abilities. It's possible for summons to generate auto abilities. Perhaps the most well-known famous one is Brynhildr, because Brynhildr, it has that effect that says when the forward is put from the field in the break zone this turn, draw 1 card. So it creates a delayed auto ability when it resolves. So it's possible for a summon to generate an auto ability. But what you're looking for is part of the effect to say when X or at the X. That's always on any effect. If it says when X or at the X somewhere in it, then that's That's an auto ability. So Ifrit doesn't have that. Ifrit's text says, select one of the 2 following actions. If you control 5 or more fire characters, select up to 2 of the 2 following actions instead. And the first action is choose one forward, deal it 5,000 damage, and the second action is choose one forward, deal it 5,000 damage. So Ifrit's cheeky because you're just choosing the same action twice, but they get around that you're choosing the same one by going, we're giving you 2 of the same ones. It's do you want tap water or do you want water from the tap? It's the same thing. So the question here is how that works with a card like Siren. And Siren has the auto ability that says when one or more forwards you control are chosen by your opponent's summon or ability, you may put the top card of your deck into the break zone. If the card put into the break zone is not a forward, cancel its effects. So the basic answer for this is fairly straightforward because Siren's trigger event is when one or more forwards you control are chosen by your opponent's summon or ability. So if Ifrit here gets cast and you have 5 fire characters, so you get to do both actions, and you use the first one and you choose this forward over here and you deal 5,000 damage, and then you choose this forward over here and you deal 5,000 damage, or you at least you hope is going to deal 5,000 damage, but you choose both of those with the same summon. Siren's going to trigger once because the trigger event is when one or more forwards. So it doesn't really matter that 2 of them got chosen because her trigger event is looking at the broader picture here. If it said when a forward you control is chosen by your opponent's summoner ability, then if Ifrit had chosen 2 different targets, then you would get 2 separate triggers of Siren, because it would be 2 instances of a forward you control being chosen by the summon. You might naturally follow up this question with what happens if it was worded like that, if it was an effect like the one I just described, which just says when a forward is chosen. What if you had cast Ifrit and you did both actions on the same target, but the auto ability was worded differently? What would happen then? An example of this would be the Opus 14. Yeah, it's 14. Vaughn, right? The Opus 14 Vaughn triggers when a Sky Pirate that you control is chosen by your opponent's summoner ability. It doesn't say one or more. It's just when a Sky Pirate is chosen. So if Ifrit chooses Vaughn twice, the not obvious thing here is that Vaughn would still only trigger one time. And the reason why is that it lumps it all together, both the actions here, and basically goes, oh, well, it's only choosing Vaughn once, even though it's choosing Vaughn for 2 different actions of the same thing. There is only one instance of this summon choosing Vaughn. It's doing multiple things to him, but it's only choosing him once. And again, that's not at all intuitive. And, there's maybe some of you being like, are you sure about that? Or that doesn't make any sense. I assure you this has been asked and litigated all over Twitter before, and yeah, they've explicitly said that choosing the same forward twice with a single effect only counts as choosing it once for the purpose of like an auto ability like Sirens, something like that triggers off of an effect choosing. So yeah, gotta watch out there. But because of the way Siren is worded, it doesn't really matter whether you're choosing the same thing twice or choosing 2 different ones. It's still only going to trigger Siren once. Next up, we've got, does the 2 activation make Rala an invalid target, stopping the break the former? Or, because it was still selected while it was dull, does it still break, since it does not say break the dull forward? Rala, I've had lots of questions about Rala, and this is actually the simplest one because all we need to know about Rala for this question is that Rala has an action ability that says pay 2, activate Rala. Forget the rest of what Rala does. All we need to know is that it can pay 2 and activate itself. Mateus, however, on the other hand, Mateus looks like it has a lot going on, but the first 4 lines of it are just about alternate casting cost stuff. So all we need is the effect here, and the effect says choose 1 dull forward and up to 1 other forward. Break the former dull and freeze the latter. So it's choosing one or two forwards. The first forward, it has to be a dull one. The second one, it could be anything. And then the first one chosen is going to be broken by the effect when it resolves, and the second one is going to be dull and frozen when it resolves. So their question here is that they're choosing raw law with the first choice here, where it says choose a dull forward, and then when that resolves, it says break the former. So choose a dull forward, and then they're saying in between the casting of Mateus and the resolving of Mateus, the raw law owner pays 2, they activate raw law. So what happens now? Raw law is active. How are we going to resolve this? And luckily, this is also kind of a straightforward one. We see this with all sorts of effects, where when there's an effect that chooses a target and it gives a specific descriptor of that target, in this case, the descriptor is a dull forward, it's going to check that descriptor or that requirement, however you want to think of it. It's going to check it both when you're putting it on the stack and choosing your targets, and it's going to check it again when it resolves. So if it had to choose a dull forward, if it had to choose an active forward, if it had to choose a forward of a specific job, if it had to choose a forward of a specific element, if it had to choose a forward of that's got power above 5,000, right? There's all sorts of different things that that might be a descriptor of that forward, and it's going to check when you're targeting it, because if it's not true, whatever that descriptor is when you're targeting it, it's going to go, you can't target this, and then it's going to check again on resolution to make sure that it's still a valid target, make sure that it still fits that description, and if it doesn't fit that description, then the effect can't do anything to it, because it goes, nope, you're invalid. You're an invalid target, so we can't do anything to you anymore. So if raw law gets activated and you go to resolve Mateus, it's going to resolve and say, all right, where's that dull forward? And it looks at raw law and it's like, you're not a dull forward, so you're free to go, right? Because you don't fit the description anymore. I came here looking for a dull raw law. You're not a dull raw law. So yeah, it's a very common way to get around things that choose a specific type of forward. We've been seeing this since the very, very early days of FFTCG, with especially when a giant portion of Lightning cards had to choose an active forward. It's like, oh, I choose an active forward? Well, cool, I have a way to dull it, and now it's safe, right? And the same thing with Ice choosing dull stuff and then activating it and being like, haha, it's active now. So the effect doesn't care, doesn't do anything. All right, our final question is more raw law. We got a double dose of raw law to end here. If you have raw law out and use this, do you get to deal 4K? I know you get the haste. So this is where we have to talk about the rest of raw law. For the last question, we just got to know that, hey, it can activate itself. But now we have to talk about how Y'shtola interacts with raw law. So let's go over the rest of raw law first, just as a refresher. Raw law has both a field ability and an auto ability. The field ability says if you receive damage while raw law is active, dull raw law, the damage becomes 0 instead. So if raw law is active and you're about to receive a damage, it's both a replacement effect, but it does something. So the replacement effect as part of it dulls raw law and then makes the damage become 0. And then you have this auto ability that says when active raw law becomes dull, choose one forward opponent controls, break it. So in the act of resolving the field ability that has a replacement effect, you're going to end up triggering the auto ability there as well. Y'shtola has two parts to her that interact differently with raw law. We're going to go over both, even though the question only asks us about one. But Y'shtola has, the first part says, when Y'shtola enters the field, you may receive 1 point of damage. When you do so, until the end of the turn, Y'shtola gains haste and Y'shtola cannot be blocked. So that part is just when she enters the field, you, as the controller of Y'shtola, can go, I'm going to take a point of damage. And then as long as you decided to take a point of damage, then she gets haste and can't be blocked on the end of the turn. Her second auto ability says, when either player receives a point of damage, choose one forward opponent controls and deal it 4,000 damage. So the trigger event for the first one is, it's her entering, and then it's the when you do so. And the second one, the trigger event, is when either player receives a point of damage. So the question itself, well, we'll start with what's literally asked here. The question is, if you have Rala out and you use Y'shtola's effect, do you get to deal the 4K? So we control Rala, we control Y'shtola. Y'shtola enters the field. We decide to take the point of damage. We go to take the point of damage, and then Rala, the field ability, kicks in and goes, hold on. And then Rala becomes dull, and then the damage becomes 0. So we're asking, is that going to trigger the when either player receives a point of damage or not? And the answer here is that it is not going to trigger that, because the trigger event is receiving a point of damage, and Rala is preventing you from taking a point of damage. So in order for Y'shtola to trigger, we need to have a player actually receive a point of damage. That's the trigger event. And you receive the point of damage, which normally means putting the damage in the damage zone. I mean, technically it could trigger off of if you took a point of damage and didn't have anything there. It's not required for there to be a card there, but at that point the game's over. You've just been milled out. Oh, excuse me. So, yeah, the trigger event being that you have to receive a point of damage means that Rala has prevented that trigger event from happening at all. So, yeah, I'm not going to get the 4K. Now, the first half of this the second half of this said, I know you get the haste. And you watching this might be like, I don't know that you get the haste. Why don't you get the haste? We don't get the point of the 4,000 damage. Why are we getting the haste? So to go back into Y'shtola for a second, the first ability, when she enters, you may receive a point of damage. And then it says, when you do so, until the end of the turn, Y'shtola gains haste and Y'shtola cannot be blocked. So rightfully so, you might be thinking, okay, I decided to take the point of damage. Rala did Rala's thing and prevented the point of damage. So why would I get the when you do so? Why would that trigger? Because I didn't actually receive a point of damage. Because when you do so, and the do so is receive a point of damage, right? So that's the argument there. But the way things work with effects here is that whenever it says when you do so is basically saying when you decide to do the thing that it asked you to do before. Like when you say, I'm going to do that, like you've kind of affirmed, I'm doing it. And whether or not the thing you've decided to do actually gets carried out the way that is expected doesn't matter. It's you have decided to do so. And so whether or not the doing so actually resulted in what it's normally supposed to is irrelevant. It's all about the fact that you decided to do that. So in the case of Y'shtola, it comes the point when you're resolving her initial auto ability where you go, I'm going to take a point of damage. And at that point, when you've decided I'm going to take a point of damage, it triggers the when you do so. Another kind of similar instance that you can think of is we have the Lena backup and now the Sid Waff backup that trigger off of when the opponent uses an X burst, right? So it triggers off of when they decide to use the X burst. But deciding to use the X burst is different from whether the X burst actually resolves and does anything. So the moment that you say, I'm going to use the X burst, it triggers. We haven't actually done the X burst yet. Now, it doesn't use the stack, but it's like as soon as you've decided, then we've triggered Lena or Sid Waff. They have to wait for somebody to get priority to get put on the stack, but it's the deciding to do it is what triggers it, not what actually happens when you resolve it. So here, the when you do so is just saying that you decided to take a point of damage. Now, Rala stepped in and went, no, you don't. But you decided to. And since you decided to, you carry this out. Another kind of example we've had for a long, long time of something like this is when you have an effect that says you may put XYZ card into the break zone. When you do so, do ABC. And then if the opponent had like the Opus 1 5CP unit out, so you go to put it in the break zone, and then they go, no, it's going to get removed from the game instead. So you might think, well, wait a second. You said if when you do so, and when you do so is putting the card into the break zone, but it didn't go into the break zone. It went removed from play because of Una. That's another instance we've had since the earliest of days where, again, the when you do so is that you decided to put it in the break zone. The fact that there was a replacement effect that then made it so you didn't get put into the break zone, or that the card didn't get put in the break zone, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's the fact that you decided to do so, like you committed to doing it, and then something else came in out of nowhere and then just body checked what you're about to do. Doesn't matter. All it cares about is that you said, I'm going to do the thing, even if you know that the thing's not going to happen in the case of Rala. So that's the distinction between those two, is that one of them is the trigger event is just deciding to take the point of damage, and the other one, the trigger event, is actually taking a point of damage. And in the case of Rala, one of those things happens and the other one does not. So fun, tricky stuff with Rala and different types of auto abilities. And that's it. That's our 10th one. So I forgot to mention at the beginning, but yes, you could be scoring yourself along the way. We had 10 questions, and you could give yourself a score out of 10 on how you did, and either pat yourself on the back or give yourself a needs improvement note on your own little quiz there. But anyway, that's going to do it for today. Once again, anybody who's going to the Raleigh Materia Cup, best of luck to you. If you're involved with running the Raleigh Materia Cup, best of luck to you as well. It's a lot of work to run these. And if you want to find me in various places, you already found me right now. I'm on YouTube right here, this thing that you're watching. And I'm YouTube / at Judge Jared on YouTube there. So you can like this video, you can subscribe to my channel, you can go like other videos, you can comment on this video, you can comment on other videos, all that stuff. But the liking, the subscribing is what I'm supposed to say here, and it just, feels good when I get those notifications, right? Anytime it's like, someone liked it or someone subscribed, like, yeah. So thank you to everybody who has subscribed, and if you haven't, you should join those people. Become one of them. If you want to find me on Facebook, I'm at facebook.com / Judge Jared. So you can like that over there and see all of the, I upload the questions with links to the specific timestamps of where those questions get answered on every single one that I've done of these 20 now videos for Rules Roundup. And you can also find when there's spoiler spreadsheets, I put up the link and everything and all that on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter as well, where I am at Judge Jared FFTCG, where that's where I go to ask Hobby Japan the questions about how does this work, or when I go, your FAQ entry is incorrect, in a much nicer way. So you can go follow me over there on the Twitter. And then lastly, on Discord, my username is Judge Jared, and my DMs are open. So if you want to ask me any rules questions on Discord, shoot me a rules question. I answer them for all sorts of people. And or if you just want to share something, if you want to see, if you have any suggestions about something you want to see me cover, or you want some clarification about something that I've answered or whatever, you can reach out to me on Discord. But I think that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. You're awesome. We rounded up the rules. We did it. 20 of them in the books. All right. Thank you for watching. I'm Judge Jared. And until next time, court is adjourned.